Welcome to Channel Squared, where we connect with you, the divine, and channel here with you live. I'm Heather Marie, founder of Soulgate.
And I'm Jody Lynn Craven, founder of Abundance Consciousness. And today we are talking about the lower consciousness perspective of law of attraction. And I am so excited to have this conversation, Heather, because I think the distortion of law of attraction, this lower level consciousness perspective, that's a lot of words all in one. It's the way that you're perceiving the concept, essentially. And it's a lower frequency vibration. I think a lot of people are stuck here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look, law of attraction has a really good place in creating the life that you want to experience. And then there's kind of that distorted side of the law of attraction, which I think is what we're going to talk about today. That what am I doing to create this in my life when you're having the opposite of what you wish to experience?
Yeah. Well, and let's start with what is the law of attraction, I guess, just to put it out there. We've talked about it a lot before, but the way that I see it is like attracts like.
Yeah, I think that that's a very great way to summarize it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's you are attracting what you're putting out.
Yeah.
Like attracts like.
And the distortion or the difficulty, how do I want to say this? Basically, what's messed up about it, Heather, is that we use it as a big beating stick. We were talking about this last week. You know, if myself included, I have done this where we go into the world, we learn about law of attraction, like attracts like, and then something perceivably bad happens in our reality. You know, your relationship falls apart, you have less money than you thought you would have, something goes wrong with your car. And the automatic assumption is I did something wrong. This is the distortion. This is a lower perspective of consciousness or a lower frequency of consciousness. This is blame and shame and guilt and berating yourself, beating yourself up for I did something wrong. Would you agree with that? That's what the distortion is that we're seeing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a really easy distortion to experience. You are, getting ready to go to work for the day and you get in your car and you leave with plenty of time to get to work and you're hitting every red light and you're running into traffic jams and there's accidents on the road. And before you know it, you already know you're going to be late to work and you're freaking out because what did you do to create this? I mean, you left on time, you did all the things you were supposed to do. So why is this happening to you today? Of all days when you have an important meeting with your boss, right? So now you're in this distortion of what am I doing to create this? I did all the things right that I was supposed to do in order to be there on time. And now I'm going to be late because of all these external factors that I have no control over. So what have I done to manifest this in my life?
Yeah. What did I do wrong?
And the fact is it could be that all these things were occurring because maybe you were going to get into an accident. The universe is conspiring in your favor. You're actually going to make it to the meeting alive today. Because if you would have actually been en route where you were, that accident you drove through, that would have been you and not that other guy. Or maybe you are contributing to somebody else's creation. Maybe your boss is running late and your boss never wants to be the one that's running late because your boss is the boss.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I start emphasizing the words wrong, bad. I did something bad because this is where the distortion begins, that you have done something wrong, i.e., worthy. You are now deserving of the dumpster fire you have created. and that you are bad in some way. And I put emphasis on these words because of what I'm going to say next. We have a perception of what these things mean. Bad, awful, horrible, can never come back from it. Everybody has their own twist on what they think this word means, but rarely in our society do we stop and take stock of what it means to us. It's my fault. What does fault mean? And where I start with this in my practice and in my personal life is, what is the definition? Does that definition resonate? And typically, like if we were to actually look up the definition of fault, you've done something very, very bad. It is your personal responsibility. You can never come back from it. It's like the worst of the worst of the worst. Okay. And you may have attracted something. You may have created something uncomfortable in your life. A really good example of this for me was my ex before I met my husband. We were in love and I thought that he was the one. We got engaged. And then a month after we got engaged, it was like a train, full speed train hitting a concrete barrier. It all exploded. And the question I kept asking was, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong to attract this into my life? Like, what did I do that was bad? There's something about me that is inferior or that is lacking or is wrong, is bad, is all of these things. And so I needed to stop and start unpacking the things that I was saying to myself, because this is a lower vibrational consciousness. This is a lower consciousness perspective of the scenario that is happening. And it's not the only perspective that exists. I always talk about that, the billions of possibilities. There's also a billion perspectives that exist too. So in starting to see that, like I'm saying that I am bad. Now, fast forward 6 years later, 6.5 years later, I wasn't meant to be with that man. I was not actually happy. One of my, greatest friends in the world, after I started dating my now husband, she saw me with him and she said to me, I realize now that even though I've known you for years, I've never seen you genuinely smile. AKA, I've never seen you genuinely happy like you are with Nate. Like, holy crap. I didn't even know I wasn't happy in that relationship, that wasn't me, that I was plastic happy, which is a little drop for what's coming up next week. But I didn't know. So in that space of it's all my fault, that wasn't the case at all. I mean, it was on purpose. It was my fault. It was necessary for that explosion to happen, for a bunch of really amazing things to happen after that point. Like I would not be sitting here with you, Heather, had that not occurred. So when we start finding fault in ourselves and saying, I am bad, I've done something wrong, because we're looking at the reality in front of us and it's not exactly what we desire, we think we've done something wrong, and then we whack ourselves over the head over and over again. I need to be better. But perhaps it was exactly what needed to happen. Perhaps in that moment, if I would have taken a step back and said, okay, actually, this is what I did. I stepped back in that moment and I asked God for serenity, because I wanted to feel peace and I felt the opposite of peace. So please, God, grant me, some peace and serenity. Like I want to feel serene and I want to see what I was not seeing before, because I knew that something wasn't right, that this was happening for a reason. This is something that I lean on very heavily in my personal life as well as in my practice. When I look back at my life, everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Exactly the way that it was supposed to get me here to this moment. And I'm very, very happy that all of those things happened. Doesn't mean that it wasn't difficult in the moment. So sitting in that moment of going, like, I couldn't even get out of my bed. I was just crying and like, I was so distraught. Like I literally sat on the phone with my mom and dad on speakerphone and just cried and cried and cried and cried. Like I physically didn't have the energy to get out of my bed. My one best friend, Anita, had to come over and like literally get me dressed. That's how shaken I was. And I got on my knees and I prayed to God. I just want to feel peace. I want to feel serene. And I want to see what I was not seeing. And then it began to flash in my mind over the next several days. You know, the perspective that I had in this scenario looked like this. But what really happened, it was like almost like this curtain opened, and this is what actually was happening. And then this scenario, this is what you thought was happening, but this was what was actually happening. It was like I could see all of the reasons why that was never going to work and why this had to happen. And it had to be so destructive because it needed to rock the foundation that I was living on so that I could move into abundance consciousness, into that teaching, into a different state. It all happened for a reason. And I created it, whether it was my bigger life plan or in these moments that was leading me up to it. I created it, but not from the perspective of I'm an awful person. I created it, yes. And it doesn't mean that it was a bad thing. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that kind of comes up for me, as you're describing this, I had a similar situation. And one of the things that I found myself kind of in a, I don't know, death spiral circling the drain is the shame and the guilt and is this karma for something that I have done in my past? And I think that this is some of that lower vibrational stuff that comes with knowing and understanding law of attraction. It is a universal law. So like, it's not a law that's going to go anywhere anytime soon. And, understanding that and kind of looking at that when I was in that place that you were in was, did I bring this on myself? Is this karma repaid? And how much shame and guilt and just apathy I had for my life, my experience. I spent many, many years with that person, and the feelings of the betrayal from the relationship compounding with what did I do to create this for myself? And maybe this is karma, because maybe I was a crappy person to somebody once. And, it's easy to kind of look at all of that stuff and kind of get it really twisted up.
Yeah. And
So
blame yourself.
when somebody is in this twisting it up place, like what do you recommend to help them sort of detangle the snarl they find themselves in?
I first and foremost would go to the best friend approach because we put so much on ourselves. We want to take personal responsibility for our lives. And I think this is a side note to this understanding is I believe responsibility is simply your ability to respond. And that means in this now moment, how are you going to respond now? And instead of beating yourself over the head with a stick, like you're bad, you did something wrong, you're unworthy. We're combining all of those things. My reality sucks, therefore I am an awful person. And we want to disconnect the two. Those two ideas or ideologies separate the I called it in and that equals I deserve it. It's not an absolute. Okay. Very personal and a very personal story. When I was about 10, somewhere in there, 10 or 11, this area of my life is very hazy and foggy because of what I'll tell you next. I was molested by my next door neighbor. And I have never really spoken about this publicly. This will be kind of the first time that I've said it. And obviously, I wasn't able to comprehend what was happening because I was a juvenile. I was 10 or 11 years old. I didn't know, but I automatically went into this shame loop and everything else. And fast forward, this individual ended up killing themselves a few months after they found out that we knew, and everything like that. And there's a bunch of stuff all in this story. When I learned about law of attraction, my first perception of looking at that scenario was I called that into my life, therefore I deserved to be abused. No, nobody deserves to be abused in any way, shape, or form. So separating the two, I called this in for whatever reason, and I see different reasons as I evolve consciously, and separating that I deserved it. Nobody deserves that. Let's take that off the table. It has nothing to do with deserving. God help any woman, any child, any man who has ever been through that. That is devastating. That is awful. That is horrible. That should never happen. Okay. And I think we could distort forgiveness as well. If I forgive, I'm letting them off the hook. That's not the case either. And looking at, I called this in. I can get behind the fact now from a new perspective of I called that in to play a role for that individual. I called that in to learn all of the beautiful things that came out of that. You know, my relationship with my father has forever been changed for the better because it had to. He was my clutch in that situation because he, I don't even know how old he would have been. I'm bad at math, but young. He was young in his life, and he had to deal with this and deal with the fact that this was also the individual who this happened with was also a minor who was in a very precarious home situation as well. Like managing all of those things and then also trying to protect your daughter. What an incredibly difficult place to be. So I called this into my life, not because I deserve to be hurt like that, not because I deserve to go through pain like that. Perhaps I called it in to learn the things that I needed to, and I volunteered to play that part with him. I won't know until I go to the other side and find out what the story is, the whole perspective. But first, it's separating the blame from calling it in. Calling it in is not good or bad. It simply is. And then now we have the personal responsibility to respond and re-respond as we ascend. Now looking at that being, he's no longer on this earth. I've never channeled him, nor will I ever channel him, but I have connected with his spirit in other ways. And I know that he is safe. And I know that there was that role that was going on there. I know at the soul of him, he was not an evil person. He was lost himself. And I can forgive and let go of that scenario and choose to look at what I called in to learn and absorb as many lessons as I can as I grow up and as I was in that moment, and forgive and let go of that without letting him off the hook. It's still bad. It was still awful. No one should ever do that to someone else in their life. Both can exist and both can be true at once.
That's the first time I've heard that story. So I'm sitting here going, wow, out of all the conversations we've had, how come we haven't had this one? So I'm not even sure how to follow up with that.
Well, that's a big one.
I mean, first, I'm so sorry that happened. And I think it's really speaks to your character and your conviction and your faith to be able to move through something like that and to be able to forgive from experiencing something like that. And I think that is one of the beautiful things about understanding the law of attraction and how to shift the perspective that you have in one moment to the next, and I know when Abraham Hicks, Esther Hicks, when she channels Abraham, a lot of the teachings that Abraham teaches is about moving up the emotional ladder. And, as you move up the emotional ladder, you create this vortex of creation, right? And that is where your attraction comes from, is from this vortex created by the moving up the emotional ladder. And so when you're in these low vibrational frequencies, how are you going to move up the emotional ladder? And I think that was a great example that you gave about how to, when you have this awareness, how you move into this new like shifting of frequency so that you can end up in a peaceful place. And if peace is as high as you can go with it, then that's pretty dang good. And if you can only go from, complete despair to anger, well, that's okay too.
Yeah. It's an evolution. And it's really about separating the blame and the I created it, because we want to be responsible, and we've attached the two things together. And I did the exact same thing with law of attraction at the beginning, blamed myself. Somehow I called that experience in. I am wrong. I am bad. I did something wrong. No, I was 11 or 10. There was no way that I wanted that to happen. Like, that has never made sense to me in terms of law of attraction. And it didn't become clear until I realized that there was this lower frequency or lower consciousness of understanding of law of attraction. That's where the blame and the personal responsibility are combined. You shift or separate the two. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. It just simply is. And I can respond from here. And I can choose to look at how I was empowered, how I created some of the things, or I called in to create some beautiful things in my life because of this experience that I had at that time in my life.
Amazing. Amazing. If you're liking this conversation, please hit the like button, subscribe, turn your notifications on. I know next week we have a really interesting topic on deck, so you'll definitely not want to miss that. We're kind of doing, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're sort of talking about attraction and creation and, how abundance in general and some of these distortions around it, because I think that, we wanted to put something together for you that you could kind of go from one to the next to the next. So, definitely stay tuned next week for kind of like a part 3 of what we're going through here. So,
yeah. And I mean, this conversation sparked from a post I saw on Facebook, somebody talking about how law of attraction is not a law, it's more of a guideline, and how if you utilize it as a law, it's destructive to your life. And there was a lot of people in the comments that were like, amen, absolutely. I wanted to kill myself because I was blaming myself. And what came through for me was that it was this lower consciousness perspective of law of attraction. And I'm not trying to judge any of these people. I have been there. And I think I wanted to speak to this topic. We wanted to speak to this topic to help people raise their conscious vibration around it. Take the blame and the shame out. Okay. It's an exchange of energy. It's a flow of energy, this cycle of things happening and then other things happening and then other things happening. There's not that same shame and blame and emotional attachment to it all and being wrong. And that the universe doesn't really have that part of it. It's like, like 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, great. Here you go. Like, but we think, oh my God, I did 1 + 1 and I created 2. I'm an awful person. No, absolutely not. You're not an awful person. Separate the two and begin to see that it's simply about you responding to what is happening in this now moment. And that people do this with money all the time. Their reality, which is their bank account, is at a lower amount than what they would like, or they're like fearing I'm not going to be able to pay my bills or whatever, and they're getting into this frequency of scarcity, and then all of a sudden their car breaks down, and they're really chugging that train forward on the disaster. And what's playing in the back of the mind is, I'm doing something wrong, I'm to blame, I'm not working hard enough, I'm all of these things. Okay, separate the actions. Okay, perhaps you maybe didn't work as hard as you wished you would. You start to look at that conversation of, is it absolutely true that I have to work like this, whatever that definition is? Is it absolutely true that it has to look like this? Is it absolutely true that I am bad because I created this? Or is there another message here that perhaps I'm not in alignment in my life? My life is not in alignment. I am not in alignment with receiving. And not from a place of whack, I'm going to beat myself up over it, but perhaps a place of empowerment. Like, okay, can I take a step back and without judgment, just be my own best friend and take care of myself, and ask myself as my best friend, like, what can I do to support you? And, maybe what are the things that are contributing to this lack mentality? Again, without judgment, because you can't go back and you can't change that. I can't go back into my lifetime and change anything that's happened. However, I can change the way that I see it, the way that I perceive it, so that it actually is something that I am embracing. And it's something that is, the word that I'm looking for is expansion. It's taking me in the direction that I want to go, rather than keeping me stuck in that old perspective that is no longer serving me.
Yeah, I think, as you've been talking, one of the things that popped in was about forgiveness. And, in your particular situation, forgiveness, when we look at forgiveness, so many times you will hear forgiveness is not for the person who did the bad thing, but forgiveness is for yourself. So you must forgive them so that you can be free. But when you start looking at forgiveness, and you are looking at it from the place of, I want forgiveness so that I can be free, and you asking yourself, what do I need to do to forgive? It's not even about forgiving them.
No.
It's about forgiving yourself for the perception of what happened. It's about forgiving yourself for placing blame and responsibility and shame and all of these things on yourself. So, when you were, moving through this after understanding the law of attraction and having this like, oh my gosh, why did I attract this to myself? That whole process allowed you to forgive all of those thoughts that you were having and gave you the freedom to move through it. So, when you hear someone saying, you need to forgive as you're experiencing whatever it is that you're going through, remember that forgiveness is about you. It's about you forgiving you for having those thoughts, for punishing yourself, that, you can't change what has occurred.
Yeah.
So, I know that it probably sounds really easy for me to say, just toss it in the bucket and move on, right? But, the fact is that it is in the past. And the more that you attach low vibrational emotions to it, the longer you get to experience it in your present. So,
Absolutely.
forgive so that you can move forward.
Yeah. And this context applies to everything, like even mistakes that you've made. Like if you've done something that you feel is so wrong and you're blaming yourself, find a way to comfort yourself and realize that you are not your mistake. You are a human being. You make mistakes. This is how we learn. Like, just like when you were learning to walk, you fell down, you got back up. You know, we're learning to walk with our relationships. We're learning to walk with our careers, with money, with the law of attraction, the universe around us. We're learning to walk with all of these things, and we're going to mess up. We're here to experience. So have that compassion with yourself too, of allowing yourself that forgiveness, and to see that you, at the core of you, is perfect and wonderful and loving, and all of those things that you perceive are great. You're still those things. You just maybe made a mistake, or you went in the wrong direction. Stop judging yourself so harshly. And like you said, carrying all of that stuff, because the longer that you attach all of it to, it has to be this way, and I was wrong, the longer you're going to carry that vibration into the future. And the more you're going to future cast it and create a reality that you don't want. So if you can sever the two and keep moving forward and allowing yourself to see different perspectives, you might not be able to see it the first time that you try, but just even moving off of it. Okay, I'm just going to let go of the shame and the blame and the guilt. And it doesn't mean anything about me. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. It's a point in time. And then empower yourself to see something new.
So beautiful. So beautiful.
Thank you. This conversation was so wonderful. And I know I kind of like just dropped a bomb in the middle there, which is uncomfortable and difficult to hear. And I hope that it inspires everybody that is watching, that you can go through really traumatic, awful things and move forward in an empowering way. Over time, you have that ability. That's what we're here to do. And I think that's really what the law of attraction means. You're creating it so that you can learn, so you can empower yourself, so you can evolve your consciousness, so you can grow as a soul, as a human being, and move to the things that you most desire to create. So thanks for watching today, everyone. I want to send you all love. And like Heather said, if you like this conversation, make sure you hit that like button. And next week on deck, we have Plastic Happy. We're going to talk all about how we convince ourselves we want this, but do we? Stay tuned for that. Make sure that you hit the reminder button so you don't miss that episode. And again, thanks for watching. See you next week.